David Gergen, I want to start with you because you served 4 presidents. The White House now saying this is nothing new. Presidents have declared national emergencies before. What's different about this one?
There's no emergency. It's a fake, and everybody knows that, and it's all about politics. Any other emergencies have been declared have true roots in national security and a real threat to the country. And I think it's not at all clear to me, Jim, that I know Jeffrey believes that the Supreme Court's likely to uphold this, but many conservatives believe in constraints on the executive. They do not like to see a president go beyond the bounds of the Constitution. And under the Constitution, under Article 1, the power to appropriate money, the power of the purse belongs to Congress, not to the White House.
Yeah, it's pretty clear in Article 1, and let's be clear that Congress is voting today. I mean, they voted already to not give money for this wall. They've made their opinion clear as to whether this is an emergency. We have some news just into CNN. This from our Manu Raju, of course, covers the Hill for us. He says that House Democratic leaders are now considering their options for challenging an emergency declaration if the president goes forward with that. Charlie Dent, you served a few terms in Congress as a Republican from Pennsylvania. What are the options on the Hill to block the president's potential action here?
Well, there'll be a resolution of disapproval, no doubt. They'll be developing a legal strategy. I'm sure the appropriators will also be already writing their bills, and they're going to further restrict transfer authority. They're going to be doing all sorts of things to torture the administration. But Jim, there's another issue here, that if you're going to declare an emergency, your remedy, in this case, building a wall, has to address the underlying emergency. I can make a very strong case, as David Gergen said, there's no emergency, and building a wall won't stop poor migrants from Central America who are trying to come through, in many cases, legal ports of entry. You couldn't build it fast enough. There are political ramifications here, too. Just on the military construction side, where does he plan to take the money from? Camp Santiago in Puerto Rico, there's hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild the National Guard facilities. There's hundreds of millions of dollars going to Alaska for vital infrastructure projects. A new hospital to take care of our wounded troops in the Middle East and elsewhere being built in Germany. European Reassurance Initiative to protect our eastern allies from Putin. Korea, moving our troops out of the line of artillery fire. The big relocation there to Camp Humphreys. These are questions that, I would, politically, this is terrible. I would never argue with Jeffrey Toobin on the legal aspects, but I can't imagine a court approving this type of blatant usurpation of congressional authority. I hope Jeffrey's wrong, and if he's right, I'll buy him dinner.
Well,
Jeffrey, response?
Say, I have a lot of experience being wrong. So you should not exactly take to the bank my prediction about this. You can just ask President Hillary Clinton, because I predicted she was going to win too.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing my best here. But this is an area where courts have shown a lot of deference to the presidents, especially in an area of national security, where they say, it is not our place. We don't have the resources to determine whether there's an emergency. That's a job for the executive branch. That's not a job for the judicial branch. You're right. This is a reordering of the constitutional system, that, the power of the purse is a bedrock power that belongs under Article 1 of the Constitution to the Congress. But the lines between the branches have not always been clear. This is one area where, there is some play in the joints, and the courts are going to have to resolve it. I'm just doing my best out here. So,
Kirsten Powers, though, short of this going all the way to the Supreme Court, you do have. Democrats are certainly going to challenge this on the Hill, and you have the possibility that a number of Republicans join them. Do you get to 2/3? That's quite a big standard to override a potential presidential veto of that. Looking at that playing field, how likely do you think that this stops on the Hill?
I don't predict the future, but it does seem, if we look at the way the Republicans have behaved under Donald Trump, that they're not super eager to challenge him. And so
that's changing, though, a bit, is it not? They've disagreed with this president on the U.S. support for Saudi war in Yemen.
Yeah.
They disagreed with this president on lifting of the sanctions against Oleg Deripaska, on Russia sanctions. They've shown greater willingness to challenge, or, well, frankly, to contradict the president.
Okay, so greater willingness than where it was zero willingness, right? So it's very incremental, and so I think that the question is whether or not it's not just the precedent issue, and because I think the administration is making this argument, right, that this actually fits with the precedent in the sense that this is a national security situation, and so past presidents have invoked a national emergency in a national security situation. The problem is what has been identified here, which is this is not a crisis. It's a manufactured crisis, and if you look at where he went to make his case in El Paso, you had pretty much every elected official there, including the Republican mayor, say, this isn't like everything you just said isn't true. So the place that he went to make his case, they're all saying the defense here did not do the things that you said, the way you've described the crime did not occur, and so the underlying facts of this are the problem. I think I don't think there's a real dispute that the president has the authority to declare a national emergency.
But the question are the
it's
facts.
just, can you just make up an emergency?
In El Paso, he repeatedly used a falsehood about the crime rate in El Paso being impacted by a wall when in fact the crime dropped many years before and increased a little bit at the beginning of the wall. Abby Phillip, tell us how the White House is processing all this.
Well, I think they're just in a wait-and-see mode. One thing we really need to be careful about as we watch what happens over the next hour is in what order is the White House going to do all of these things? Is he going to declare a national emergency first, or is he going to pull money from some of these pots that are easier to acquire without and delaying the national emergency until the politics of it are more clear? I think for Republicans, the White House has reason to believe that on this issue, on the wall, Republicans are less likely to balk against President Trump, because unlike a lot of foreign policy issues, the wall is kind of like a central political issue that the president has organized the Republican Party around. And I think that they believe voters are much more motivated by those issues than they are by Russia.
Remind us, CNN's polling, the opposition to the wall, if we could put that up, it's 2-1. 2-1 against this being a necessity, if we can get that data up.
Republican voters support the president on the wall.
There it is, 66-31. And those numbers, those are national figures. Independent voters have a very similar ratio against the wall.
He's created this problem for himself, because he is the one who has demagogued this and convinced the conservative base that this is a crisis, right? So now you do have, as Abby's saying, like you have the voters that are the most engaged, who are going to make the most noise, who 100% believe that this wall is going to solve the problem.
His strategy has consistently targeted that. David Gergen, if I could ask you, the president has been sitting on this for months. We should note he's leaving for a long weekend after declaring a national emergency. Presumably, if it was a national emergency, you would have declared it months ago, rather than waiting and hemming and hawing and having all these various debates on the Hill. Is that relevant to how both the courts and the Hill react to this?
I do think it's relevant, especially for the courts, that he has subjected this to the congressional process, went through a shutdown, and basically the political system came back and said, we're only going to give you a paltry amount of money, and he's going to these emergency powers. That shows that he tried to solve this as a political problem. He saw it as a political problem, not a national security problem when he started. Going to the courts by definition is going to take months and months. So I think that diminishes or weakens the argument, wow, we got this thing on the border that if we don't shut it down tomorrow, you're going to have people running through this country screaming and robbing you. And that's simply not the case. Jim, one other question I would be curious about, and others may have a view on, is what kind of barrier does he now envision with this extra money? Does he plan to go back to the idea of a concrete wall? Some large 30-foot wall, the way he envisioned. That, I think, would be a huge turnoff for the country. If it's more like the kind of fencing we've heard about with the previous administrations, I think he's got it's potentially will go down better.